Hello King's Church, it's wonderful to be sharing with you today. I trust that you're doing well. I wish I could be with you in person, but for today it's recorded online. So today I want to talk to us about the season in which we're living and that we've been living through. 1 Chronicles 12:32 talks about the men of Issachar understanding the times in which they lived, and therefore they knew what they should do. Now I want to explore some aspects of that with us today. There are 3 stages that are recognised in emergency relief response after a crisis such as a natural disaster. And although the crisis that we've been experiencing in the last 18 months or so is unlike any events we've experienced in our lifetime, these 3 stages following a crisis can perhaps help us understand a little bit more about the times that we've been living through and are living in now. Now, these 3 stages that are well recognised are considered to be response, recovery and rebuilding. In emergency relief, the response stage involves dealing with and prioritising the immediate need. So back in 2020, around about March time, we obviously faced something that we'd never had before in our lifetimes when we had the pandemic and the following lockdown. And this initial stage meant meeting basic needs. At one stage that seemed to be making sure everyone had enough toilet paper. But on a more serious note, obviously it meant lots of us working from home, homeschooling our children. Of course, many of us were continuing on the front line in different capacities, perhaps in the NHS or in teaching or transport or local shops. And we're so grateful, aren't we, for people continuing those roles during that time and to this day as well. But of course our national response was to shut down a lot of activities, shut down a lot of the things that we were doing in life. And as well as that, it wasn't just stopping activities. The pandemic obviously generated significant need, and we as a church were able to play a part in meeting some of those needs. You might be aware that John Hopkins was involved in spearheading and how the church could set up a project alongside other churches to give out school lunches to children that weren't accessing free school meals any longer. And perhaps there are other ways that you were helping meet the needs in your local community, perhaps looking out for your neighbours or supporting some of those that were isolating. And I know for many it was a period where there was lots of emotions going on. We were concerned, worried, uncertain what the future held. But following that stage of response, we have the stage of recovery, where we're looking for healing and strength after experiencing a really difficult and challenging time. Obviously, many of us experienced loss in different ways, be that jobs or friends or family. And of course, many of us suffered with isolation, and then perhaps there was implications in terms of mental health for us, or pain and anxiety. And just struggling to understand what normal is and what was going on. And perhaps as well for many of us, our faith in God had taken a real knock during that time. I think one thing for us to really be reminded of and know is that it's okay to not be okay. You know, we hear that sometimes being said, don't we? It's okay to not be okay, but we need to be reminded of that truth, and also encourage that we can speak to those alongside us, our brothers and sisters in Christ, our church community, about where we're at, about the things we've struggled with, about the perhaps crisis of faith that we might have had. And of course it's so important for God to be able to speak to us from that place of hurt. Matthew 11:28 in the Passion Translation says, "Are you weary, carrying a heavy burden? Come to me, I will refresh your life, for I am your oasis. Simply join your life with mine, learn my ways, and you'll discover that I'm gentle, humble, easy to please. You will find refreshment and rest in me." And perhaps even now we can just take a moment to allow Jesus to work in our hearts and minds and souls, that we can give our hurt and worries to him, allow him to help heal us, refresh us. You know, it's also really important that we make space to tell our stories and to reflect on everything that we've been through. And that's something we've been trying to give opportunity for in Withenshaw community. And I trust and hope that that you've had some of that opportunity, particularly in recent months since the end of lockdown. You've been able to sit down and talk face to face with your friends, your families, about some of your disappointments, some of your hurts, some of your struggles over the last 18 months. And hopefully as well, some of the successes, some of the positives that have come out of this time, some of the prayers that have been answered, things that you've seen God do. So the third stage is rebuilding. And in the physical, this is a step-by-step constructing of something after it's been damaged. But of course, here we're not talking about a physical rebuilding. This pandemic isn't a disaster where buildings have been destroyed, but we are thinking about rebuilding of our community, rebuilding of church. Not that church has been destroyed, but we do of course recognise that many things have been put on hold, that we've had to change and adapt and how we've done things. We haven't been able to be physically together for a lot of that period. And as well, as I mentioned, you know, some of you may feel that you need a rebuilding of your faith too in this time. I think it's really important to recognise that we're all at different places, that we've all experienced the pandemic very differently. We've all been recovering perhaps at different speeds. And as well, it's not to say that one day we kind of finish recovery phase and then the next day we start rebuilding. It doesn't work like that, does it? And of course, in terms of recovery, you know, we need to recognise that the impacts will go on for years to come in some respects when we think about economically following the pandemic. But I really believe as well that the process of rebuilding can aid recovery. You know, in the act of rebuilding community together, rebuilding and establishing our next normal, it can help us to process and deal with the experiences we've had over the last 18 months and move forward. And I start to think about examples of rebuilding. You know, you might think of the rebuilding of St. Paul's Cathedral after the Second World War, or other famous buildings that have been rebuilt. But a story that I was drawn to was from the book of Nehemiah. And I realised probably quite a few other churches and church leaders have been thinking about this book in the Bible, perhaps recently. And I'm not sure if you're familiar or remember that story, but Nehemiah is an Israelite, and he's working for a Persian king. And he has quite a nice job, really quite a cushy job as cupbearer to the king. But he becomes aware of the walls of Jerusalem are being broken down and not restored. And in that, finding that out, his response is to weep and to mourn. But then in chapter 1, verse 4, it tells us that he prayed and fasted. And perhaps there's some keys for us there. Yes, he mourned, he processed, but then he came to God in prayer and in praise. You know, when we declare our praises to God, we're reminded of his goodness and faithfulness, and it realigns our perspective again with his perspective. And in chapter 2 of Nehemiah, we read how he took quite a big risk. He came before the king to ask if he could go to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. He was bold and he gave his life for something big, for a purpose that God had put in his heart. He didn't just take the easy option. You know, he could have continued with his cushy job, but he really stepped out and he did what God had put on his heart. And I think this really aligns with what Kofo was talking to us about last week when he talked about the 3 legs of the tripod, if you remember, and one of those being an assignment from God. You know, Nehemiah truly knew his assignment from God. He prayed, he fasted, he took time, and then he responded. And I just want to share an example of someone else doing this with quite a big project. So we're going to watch a short video now about an assignment that God put on someone's heart, and we're beginning to see the fruit of that. So should we take a little look at this video?
Good evening. First tonight, the final fundraising push for a new national landmark here in the West Midlands is underway. A further £2.5 million is needed to fund the Eternal Wall of Answered Prayer near Coleshill.
Permission for the Christian monument near the M6 and the M42 was granted a year ago. Those behind the project say it'll give a massive boost to the local economy. Lewis Warner reports.
Standing at more than 160 feet, the Eternal Wall of Answered Prayer promises to be a destination for everyone. a giant infinity loop made up of 1 million bricks, each telling a personal story of a time people have felt helped by God. Today, exploring the chosen ground, the former chaplain who came up with the project 17 years ago feels his idea is finally becoming reality.
It's terrifying, but we basically need to raise £2.5 million, and if we can do that, then we will start building in the spring of next year. And I suppose it's sort of the moment where, you know, we're going to the public and going, okay, do you want this? The world that we live in now is so busy, so fast moving. So we're trying to build a space where people can reflect and think and consider the stories and consider whether prayer and faith should be part of their life.
Isn't that an absolutely fantastic project? I'm really excited by that project, and I trust that you are too. And what's amazing is that in that project that we hear about in the video there, it's just an example of someone capturing the heart of God for something, praying into it, and then, you know, many years later being able to see that being realised. And one of the things I love about this project as well is the tagline for it. It didn't mention in the video, but the tagline is "Make Hope Visible." Make hope visible. I think that's really amazing, and I trust that God has put something on your heart, on our heart, which will make hope visible to those around us. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a massive project like we just heard about. It could be simple things. It could be looking out for an elderly neighbour. It could be praying with a Christian colleague. It could be joining a local project to build community and share the gospel. It could be seeing a new church community of King's Church established in your local area. It could look like many different things, but the important thing is that God has put something on your heart, something that will make hope visible to the people around you. And how do we want to rebuild? I think that's a good question for us to be asking. We want to, of course, build with Jesus as our focus. Psalm 127 verse 1 says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labour in vain." We want to build in partnership with the Lord. We want to build in partnership with Jesus as our focus, making Jesus famous. And our lenses in doing that will, of course, continue to be discipleship and mission, which we've been talking about for some time now. You know, we have an opportunity, like Nehemiah, to give ourselves to something that God has put in our heart, to give ourselves to something eternal and an eternal purpose. And I really believe that rebuilding community, rebuilding and establishing church is something of an eternal purpose. And I think in response now, it'd be great for us just to spend some time considering what it is that God has put in our heart, but where we're up to as well, and maybe in those stages where we feel we're up to in terms of recovery, where we're up to in terms of starting to rebuild. And there might be some things that God puts on your heart as you take time seeking Him, hearing from Him. So perhaps in response to this word, you could spend some time doing that, either in the meeting now or perhaps some time when you're at home, and perhaps have a look at the book of Nehemiah as well yourself. There's lots more keys and things for us to discover from that account in the Bible. So I'd encourage you to do that. And I trust that there are lots of great things for us ahead as a church community, as a wider community. So thank you so much for listening today, and God bless you.